What is the effect on the seller of that? The effect is they're going to be really selling their business, which most of it is going to be goodwill. And let's say Helen's business is worth $25 million after we do our negotiating and calculating of what the fair market value of this business is from the buyer and the seller's perspective. And they only have assets on the books of about 6 or 7 million. Well, the difference between the 6 or 7 million and the 25 million is goodwill, and the buyer can write that off over time. And that'll be treated as long-term capital gain to the seller. But the rest of it, the accounts receivable, which may be a significant part of the business being sold, minus the accounts payable, are going to be taxed at ordinary income rates, which can be as high as 39.6% under federal law, plus potentially another 3.8% of the net investment income tax, plus state income tax. And usually it's a 20% delta. That's just a rough estimate of the difference between selling stock and selling the assets followed by a distribution of the proceeds. So in an S corp. So that 20% delta is a 20% premium that the seller is being asked to pay to the IRS. So we try to negotiate an increase in the purchase price to compensate us for that, and usually it's some type of middle ground that we reach when we're negotiating that might be reasonable to the seller. But we want the seller to get what they want in this transaction. Oh, and by the way, an aside, one of the earlier slides in the negotiating section, which I haven't focused on, is the seller should always know what they want at the end. They should always know what they want at the end. I repeat that because it's so important. They need to work with their financial planners, with their financial advisors, with their CFOs to figure out if they're going to get what they thought they were going to get based on the negotiated purchase price and the structure of the transaction. So you really have to sort of figure out what the end game is first and then work backwards from there to make sure that you're not negotiating something that is going to put the seller in a worse position than she would be if she hadn't done anything at all, right? Because she could hold on to the business and maybe just make as much money holding on to it, which is one of the conundrums we find today in a lot of our transactions. In a stock purchase, you typically don't have to get approvals or consents unless your contracts require it. And in many stock purchase deals, you're going to have provisions in the contracts that say if you have a change in control of the business, and that's defined in the contract, but it's usually construed as a change in the voting control, a change in the value of the company where more than 50 or 51% of the business shifts hands to an unrelated third party, then you may have to get the consent of your landlord or your landlords if you have multiple office spaces. You may have to get the consent of your customers in your contracts. So as part of the due diligence process, which we'll focus on in a minute, you need to know what kinds of consents and approvals are required. In fact, if the transaction is large enough, under Hart-Scott-Rodino, you may have to get the approval of the federal government, which will further delay the closing of the transaction. So the structure is all part of the negotiation that leads up, ultimately, to the letter of intent. But the purchase price, in negotiating the purchase price, it's always prudent, I think, in negotiating for a seller to let the buyer start. So if we conduct an auction process, what is an auction process? We hire an investment banker. The investment banker is well known in the industry in which we are operating. So we don't want to go to an investment banker who specializes in government contractors to handle a retail sale, if they don't typically handle retail sales. So you find the right investment banker, you go to the investment banker, and they help you build your case for the highest purchase price that you possibly can. And that case is going to be based on history, financial statements. It's also going to be based on your strategic plan, on your business plan, and on your projections. And are they realistic? Best case, middle case, and worst case. And they're going to help you build the case for your company. But you're going to not put out feelers in this process to hundreds of strategic buyers around the country and private equity firms who might be the buyers. You're just going to provide them with basic materials after they sign a non-disclosure agreement, agreeing not to steal your information, use it against you, or raid your customers or employees. And you're going to provide them with this information, and they're going to come back with indications of interest, maybe a one-page letter saying how interested they are in your business. You may send out 100 of these things. If you get back 5 to 10, that's a reasonable expected return for your business. And those 5 to 10 responses that you get back, you'll see wildly varying ranges of purchase price. You know, Helen thinks she wants $25 million for the business. She may see somebody come in at 15. She may see somebody come in at 45. And there may be ranges within those offers in the indications of interest. They're non-binding. It's just a letter saying, we're interested in finding out more about you. So let the buyer start with their range, and let the buyer start with the negotiations. But always, when you're coming back and saying to the person who offered 15 that we want 40, and you're so far apart, you need to have backup for your position. So it's the projections, it's the materials that you've pulled together internally and that your investment bankers helped you do to back up your position, so that if it's really justifiable under the current market environment and in your industry and for your company, you'll have grounds for asking for more. The structure also, as I noted a couple of seconds ago, will affect the price. Meaning that if it's an asset purchase, it might generate higher taxes for the seller, and so therefore we may have to increase the purchase price to make sure that our seller is compensated for the extra taxes that she's going to have to pay as a result of structuring it as an asset purchase because of all these accounts receivable we have on our books. The other thing that generates ordinary income, by the way, in a sale, are if we are selling franchises, trademarks, or tangible personal property. So if we have a lot of equipment in the business that's been amortized or depreciated, items that have been depreciated, those things get recaptured on the sale as ordinary income, and it kicks up the purchase price. So does a non-compete, by the way. So we've figured out what the purchase price is. We've negotiated with our potential buyers. Now we've received 2 or 3 letters of intent from interested buyers. And in the back of our minds, we know what we want. Our investment banker knows what we should get. And we start negotiating on the letter of intent. Because it's not just they hand you the letter of intent and you sign it. I mean, some people do. I've seen that happen. But usually it's, here's a letter of intent. The lawyers get involved in making sure that the letter of intent has certain things in it and doesn't have other things in it. Is it necessary to have a letter of intent, Tim, in your opinion?
No.
Why?
Depends on the asset, how quickly you can get to the table, but a lot of times that delays the process.
Letters of intent can delay the process, that's true. But what if it's an entire business? It's a government contracting business with lots of contracts.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So if we're buying an asset, the letter of intent probably is a waste of time and a waste of effort, or a small series of assets. If we're buying an entire business that has 300 and some employees, so that's 35 million in revenue, that's got dozens of contracts, a letter of intent makes perfect sense. And the letter of intent typically is what we call a non-binding letter of intent. Over the last 30 years, there's been litigation on whether a letter of intent really is a contract. And courts have found, in some cases, the way these documents were drafted, they were contracts, and they could be enforced in a court of law. We actually had a sale of a business earlier this year where the buyer presented us with a term sheet, a letter of intent, that had provisions in it that didn't say, this is non-binding, this was like, if they back out and they want to walk away, we could sue them, arguably, for specific performance under this term sheet, because it was as clear as day that this was an offer, and if we accepted it and signed it, that's an acceptance, that's a contract under the laws of all 50 states in the District of Columbia. But typically we try to make it a non-binding, so that nobody's obligated to go to the closing table unless certain things happen.